Roosevelt's run marked the most successful third-party effort in American history, according to History.com. Theodore Roosevelt lived an impressive life, and impressive is an understatement. Throughout his life, according to History.com's bibliography, Theodore Roosevelt came to claim many titles and accolades. Just to begin, Theodore Roosevelt, firstly, was the president of the New York City Board of Police. After that, he became the Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy, and one of his final positions he held before president, as I'm sure many of you have seen him for, is the Teddy Roosevelt, portrayed by Robin Williams in Night at the Museum, is the colonel of the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry, also known as the Rough Riders, who are most famously known during the Spanish-American War for their siege of the fort in San Juan. Theodore Roosevelt was the 26th president of the United States, and this came about due to very unforeseen circumstances. Theodore Roosevelt became president after the current president and his running mate, James McKinley, was assassinated only 8 days into his presidency. From the start, Roosevelt came out with very progressive ideals for his time. One of the first things he did, and which the White House itself on their page actually kind of goes into detail, is the Monroe Doctrine, or his advancement of the Monroe Doctrine. Theodore Roosevelt kind of pushed for the U.S. to be a powerhouse across the world. He wanted the U.S. to play kind of a middleman in foreign affairs. So he wanted the U.S. to be able to just kind of intervene in different conflicts around the world, so that way U.S. interests were kind of represented and pushed forward. For example, he helped the uprising in Panama, which he claims to be his biggest achievement in his presidency, because by accomplishing this upheaval of the government, or kind of coup, he was able to have the Panama Canal successfully built. Another thing that he is known for is, which Britannica kind of goes through in their documentary, or bibliography rather, of Theodore Roosevelt, and that is the Square Deal. The Square Deal is what can only be described as kind of a demonopolization of countries, kind of to promote capitalism. He wanted companies, or no one company, to have too much power. So in this instance, where it really was a big deal was a certain railroad company, and they were kind of taking over the railroading industry. They owned a majority of train stations and railways and trains and that kind of stuff, and it was kind of upheavaling any possibility of there being any competitors, because they already had such a stronghold in the railroading industry. So he kind of busted up all of these, or this giant company, and broke it up into different companies to kind of demonopolize the railroad industry, so that way other industries had the possibility and the opportunity to take over and kind of make money in different places. That's actually seen today in places like Disney. Walt Disney has tried to acquire different companies, and the government has stepped in and said, no, you can't do this, because then you'll have too much power in a certain industry. So even today, stuff that Roosevelt did is being felt. Another thing that he did during his presidency is he created the Clean Food and Drug Act, which kind of was the preface to the Food and Drug Administration, which today is crucial. They run drug testing to make sure drugs are okay, that they can be consumed. They test foods. They have food standards to make sure all that kind of stuff is good. And lastly, well, not lastly, but one of the other major things that Roosevelt accomplished is the formation of the National Forest Service. And in the beginning, there were over 150 national forests. That has grown exponentially today. If you go to the National Park Service, they do host, I believe it was over 140 million acres accompanied in different national parks. And that's crazy, because to think that in 1901, between 1901 and 1908, when Roosevelt was president, he was able to accomplish all of these insane things that are still being felt today. The Food and Drug Administration is still increasingly and incredibly prevalent in what we do today. It kind of dictates what can be sold, the medicines that can be consumed, and that kind of stuff. Anytime you go to a national park, that's thanks to Roosevelt. He was the one that made that kind of stuff possible. Not to say that another president wouldn't have later down the road, but he was the one that kind of got it going. The Monroe Doctrine definitely kind of pushed the U.S. being a powerhouse. Other countries started to know who we were, not that they already didn't, but we started to become more of a power, especially when World War I rolled around. We were definitely someone that countries wanted to be aligned with. And overall, Theodore Roosevelt was an incredible guy. Throughout his presidency and into his second presidency, where he created the Bull Moose Party, he was just kind of trying to change what was the normality of his time period and kind of trying to advance the country for the better of both the people then and people today.